Hello and welcome to this week's review for Movie Magpies, where we will be rating Mitchells vs. the Machines. I'm Monique, here with my co-host Will. How about we just get right into it?
Alright, so Monique, for the people who don't know what this film is, what is The Mitchells vs. the Machines?
The Netflix summary for The Mitchells vs. the Machines is a robot apocalypse put the brakes on a cross-country road trip. Now it's up to the Mitchells, the world's weirdest family, to save the human race.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up for the most part. I don't think it gets the main heart of the film, but I think that pretty much gets it.
It's interesting that this is one of those, as we've said before, a lot of hit and miss summaries we've come across. It's
Yeah,
interesting that this one gets the general plot of the movie, but without like a lot of the actual meat of the story, I guess. You know how when we watched The Farewell, it was a very, very good summary.
yeah.
And now this one's just like, oh, they were on a cross-country road trip. That's leaving out so much of the
Yeah, it
beginning of
does
the
kind of
movie.
leave out the heart of this film. That
Yeah.
being that it's a story about a father and daughter trying to reconcile.
I feel like from the summary, I didn't think this would be as focused on one relationship in the family dynamic. I thought
Yeah,
it was going to be much more focused on the family dynamic as a whole, but it really does just focus on that sort of father-daughter relationship.
yeah. I think for the most part, it is the main focus for it, and it's I don't know. I think we should just get straight into what we think about it. But for me, I think it's kind of weirdly all over the place with that.
With
Yeah,
the
oh, sorry.
plot, mm,
Yeah, in the plot, I think it's kind of weirdly all over the place, and I think for a film that it is, with a budget of wow, it's an inconsistent budget of 50 to 100 million, which with the context that the Farewell was made with 3 million, that seems a bit wild.
I feel like this movie had really great theories. I suppose it had really good intentions. You could see what they were
Yeah.
trying to get across with the story, but the execution just misses. They almost rely a little bit too much on the fact that it's marketed towards younger children to
Yeah.
just completely not flesh out parts of the story properly.
Yeah, no, it like there are definitely points where it does feel like corners have been cut, especially in terms of I would say the story for sure. And from what I've read about this film, it's been remarkably well received, but I worry that it's purely due to a hype surrounding it because like upon watching this twice, I've seen it twice. First time I could tolerate it, and second time watching it through, it got worse for me
Oh,
because
really? So it was
yeah,
worth the second watch round for you?
yeah, absolutely. I don't think it improved the second watch round because I started noticing more and more that was kind of wrong with it. The story is passable, but then there is so much tacked onto it that just doesn't need to be there. It almost feels like a solid foundation of a story, that being a father-daughter relationship that's fallen apart but can be repaired and brought back, but there's just so much more tacked on. And of course, you gotta, with the Mitchells versus the Machines, you gotta have that powerful, exaggerated storyline with the robots taking over the world and stuff like that, and that's fine. But then there's just so much more that kind of just is thrown in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think they had a good base,
Yeah,
and I remember when we watched I Am Mother, we said that it was a really tight concept that had been stretched out too thin. I
yeah,
almost feel
absolutely.
the opposite way with this movie, where it's a really good concept that they stuffed too much into. You know,
Yeah,
it
there's too
wasn't
much like
stretched
faff.
to. Yeah, exactly. Like, if this movie had have been even 30 minutes shorter and they just removed
Hmm.
half even of the like memes and jokes and pauses that they put in to be funny, the movie would come off less aggravating and it would feel a little more cohesive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just there's so much here that just doesn't need to be here, and the film kind of jumps around between this very grounded story between within the family and then sections that are dedicated to the creator of the robots and things like that, which just they just don't need to be there at all because it just leads the audience to feel disconnected from the family more so than they should be.
Yeah, I think another comment that we were both making while watching the film was that some of our favorite characters ended up being the side characters that weren't around as much. Like,
Yeah,
they have a dog called Mochi, and I personally love Mochi because his
yeah,
entire purpose in the film is to look super dumb and
yeah.
cute.
But
And
wouldn't you agree that ultimately putting a creature or an animal in there like that is always gonna elicit a very positive response?
well, what I was just going to say
Yeah.
is, and it's super interesting to me that out of all the characters, that's one of my favorites because it's just a cute, slightly ugly looking dog. That's
Yeah,
that's all he
absolutely.
does.
While we're talking about the characters, we may as well get our opinions out about each of the characters. So, we got our main character, Katie. What do you think about her?
Katie is super interesting, where I really like her as a character, but she's also incredibly annoying. You can tell that she is supposed to be a teenager, but she's
Yeah,
also applying for college,
yeah.
question mark, slash universities. So you
Well, I
kind of,
think it's an American college, so university.
okay, so it is like university age. So
Yeah,
she's what, 18-ish?
yeah,
Yeah. You can understand some of the things that she does as an 18-year-old. Like,
yeah,
when I was an
absolutely.
18-year-old, I definitely did stupid things. But also, you can maybe tone it down a bit, babe.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like she doesn't really come off as endearing as a main character should. I don't think we led to even really like her in a lot of it, which is weird. I feel like Katie is a character who, for lack of a better word, severely lacks characterization to the point where a lot of her character building is based around her family. Because this is the Mitchells versus the machines, not Katie versus the machines, but she's also still our main character, and however, as a result, she still fails to come across as a whole person
Yeah, she's
within this unit.
so exasperated by her family that you almost end up exasperated by her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because she's always there, especially with her father, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute.
Yeah, of course.
But he's always reaching out to try and bridge this gap between them that is the
Yeah,
main sort of focus of the movie's morals, I guess you could say. And she's constantly just, nah, fuck that. I don't like
yeah.
it. Don't want to do it.
She's very dismissive of her father, which is like, oh, people are going to say, oh, but this is a story about two people who realize that mutually they're mutually to blame for their falling apart or their distancing of a relationship. But in this film, what I see as the biggest problem with the story of the film is that so much of it actually is Katie's fault.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's what's difficult about how she's not that endearing, is because through the film we see the characters' behaviors and actions, and so much of the film is Katie dismissively not wanting to do things, being against doing these things, and not really giving the father, Rick, any leeway or consideration in making stuff happen. She's kind of almost a boulder that the family have to bring up the hill, and it's it's exhausting to watch sometimes, genuinely. But with that said, let's move on to... We'll get to Rick last, I think. I think that's fair.
I think that's best.
We'll talk about Aaron,
The little brother,
the little brother.
Aaron.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I had quite a love-hate relationship with his characterization because he's very,
Yeah.
very sweet and
Yeah.
he's quite a cute little character, but he gets played for laughs. Like, his entire
Yeah.
personality gets played for laughs so much that I almost ended up upset for him by the end
Yeah,
of the movie. I feel
absolutely.
like they did him dirty.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's also his character. I really like his character in the sense that on the surface he's a very sweet kid who wants to do right by his family and loves his sister very much. But his character is very inconsistent in that sometimes he's more socially aware than his sister, or even sometimes his parents. But then sometimes he's so socially unaware, but it's played off as a joke in these situations where he's so socially unaware, and it's weirdly inconsistent at points.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think one of the more annoying ones is they give him a love interest
Yeah.
for absolutely no reason. It comes up twice,
Yeah.
maybe 3 times in the entirety of the movie, and every single time it happens, he does something drastic, like once, jumps out a window.
Yeah, and
What?
I think it's to give his character a bit of direction, but it always seems so wildly exaggerated.
It's also not nearly as fleshed out as it needs to be proper direction.
Yeah,
It's just, I like girl, but don't know how to handle it, so I'm going to legitimately fight or flight run away from her
yeah, and
in the
it's
most ridiculous way possible.
yeah,
And then suddenly at the end of the movie, I've half gotten over that. What?
yeah, and I think that the characterization is with the side characters outside of the Mitchells is so minute that we don't see we don't see any reason why Aaron would care for this girl in any way other than the fact that she's the only girl of his age and height anywhere. So that feels kind of weird. But yeah, moving
Yeah.
on, we'll go to the mum. So I think we both liked the mum.
Yeah, she was lovely. What was her name?
Linda. Yeah, I didn't want
Linda.
to say Linda because I was thinking Linda Belcher from Bob's Burgers, but it is still Linda.
I
And
was also thinking that. No, I
yeah,
couldn't. I was getting
they-
stuck.
they're two very similar kind of characters. A very supportive but also vocally outspoken mother. I really like that archetype.
She is probably what I would say one of the more realistic characters in this movie,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, where she's a teacher and she has this very positive attitude about her, and her entire family is quite chaotic, so she's usually quite positive and encouraging and reinforcing.
Yeah.
Like, she feels very
And I think-
accurate, like someone you might actually meet in real life.
Yeah, and for the most part, her character, other than the dad, is probably the most consistent.
Yes, exactly. And the only times that she's not consistent are throwaway jokes, which I'm sure
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
we'll talk about in the in-depth
But that's
parts.
yeah, and that's also always kind of fine because it gives a character a randomness that makes them more real.
Yeah, it almost helps add to her realism that she's got these really odd, out of, pocket
Yeah,
moments.
absolutely. And we'll get onto the dad, Rick, now, just because in a weird way, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I think we both agreed that in this story, it almost comes off as if the dad is the main character or the protagonist of the film.
Yeah, no,
And
I completely agree with you. I actually, funnily enough, I remember when you watched this movie for the first time, you were Snapchatting me about it
Yeah,
and giving me half hints. I don't remember all of them,
that's fair enough.
but there's a couple parts that I do remember from the movie of you snapping me, and I'm
yeah?
pretty sure one of them was just you going, "It's me."
Yeah.
Just a picture of Rick. It's
Rick
me.
is very much a character that I identify with, just being a man who wants to be out in the woods and knows a lot about all that stuff and sometimes doesn't fully connect with technology. I definitely feel that way, even though I'm a lot younger than Rick. There are definitely points where I can agree with him, not to the same extent, but there are definitely points where I like Rick a lot because he's a character or an archetype that I like a lot because he comes to be aware of his flaws quite quickly and actively tries to improve upon them, and certain things that some would see as flaws but are actually more just kind of character traits that aren't necessarily fatal flaws, he embraces. But with Rick, I find it really interesting because he's the active character in this film, and
He
by
is
that,
the
sorry.
majority, if not the major plot mover.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what makes him, interestingly enough, to me, the protagonist. And the only reason why he's not necessarily the main character is because so much more time is given to Katie, as so much more screen time is provided to her, and so much more focus is provided to her. But the dad, the very first conflict we're met with is a lack of understanding between Katie and Rick makes the decision to cancel her flight, and then drive to the college as in an attempt to actually give himself more time with his daughter, which he knows he has failed to connect with, and do everything he can to make one last attempt to connect with her.
Yeah, exactly. And you almost feel, especially as the movie progresses and you get a little bit of the backstory of things that he's done for his family in the past, you feel almost bittersweet for his
Yeah.
trying, because understandably, Katie is pretty miffed that he
Yeah, of course.
cancels her plane ticket because it means she's going to miss orientation and, a lot of the
Yeah, and she's gonna
more
miss out on
social,
time with people that she feels like she belongs with.
yeah, the more social aspects of joining this uni or college or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And as the viewers, knowing that he's doing it because he wants to reconnect with his daughter so that she doesn't leave and never come back to them, almost disown them in a way, I suppose,
Yeah.
by leaving for college, there's this huge soft spot in my heart for him. Like, he's completely misguided. It was a really, really shitty thing to do, but at least he's trying.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't fault him for trying, and his attempts to do better are wholly his, and they always improve his standing within the audience to actually see that he's doing everything he can. But with that said, like, I think we get the main characters down. I think the two robots around the back, who cares? Honestly,
Yeah, they're very much just there for the joke.
it's not that they're forgettable. I think it leads on to the next kind of point that I wanted to talk to you about in the review, and we'll talk about more in depth. But the humor is rough a lot of the time.
Boomer Humour.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But then with points where the jokes do actually land, they always overstay their welcome too. And more specifically with the two robots who are malfunctioning and feel like, well, that take orders from the family and stuff like that. They show up and they like make a few really good jokes, but they're just there constantly, and then they're always making those same jokes. And it's a really, like, there are some really funny points in this film, but then there are also points in this film that you just kind of groan at because it's humor that has not aged well, genuinely.
Which is iconic because this movie was made last year and released this year.
Yeah.
And we're already saying that the jokes haven't aged well at all. It's been
No, absolutely.
a couple months since its release.
Yeah. And I also think you and I agreed that, like you said with the Boomer humor, it very much comes across as the person who wrote this didn't fully understand their target audience. As a result, the dad is more relatable than the main character.
Who is supposed to be this up-and-coming, very techie girl who wants to get into film and video creation.
Yeah, and someone who followed that exact path. I don't identify with her one bit.
I think you hated every single film student, even the background ones.
Yeah, but that's also because they just come across as really fucking pretentious and annoying.
That's very fair.
And, like, we'll talk about this more in the in-depth, but one of the things I found with the film students, which I found quite annoying, is that they're all first-year film students. So their love of Taxi Driver and films along those same lines, yeah, of course they like Taxi Driver because it's a critically acclaimed good film. The one thing you'll notice, if you've met someone who actually has studied film, and you ask them what their favourite film is, they're going to say something either obscure or something that you would consider not to be great, but they can explain why it is great.
What is your favourite film?
Surf's Up.
I knew the answer, but you just said if you'd met someone who actually studied, and I was like, "Hi, how you doing? We're friends."
Yeah, no, but it's one of these things with the film students. They just come across as more annoying characters who kind of exist. But with Katie, hearing about this film, I thought I would identify with her more, but I don't, because her character really comes across as someone's interpretation of what a young teen film student would look like.
Yeah, it'd be super interesting actually to see what the general consensus of a younger audience watching this is.
Yeah.
Because of course, I didn't go to uni, but you've finished your uni experience now. So we're on that other end of that age group, and it's that kind of phenomenon where the older that you get, the more you relate to the adults. E.g., the first time I watched Ariel, I was like, yeah, girl, get it. Go and be on the land and find yourself a boyfriend. And then the older I get, I relate more to King Triton, and I'm like, nah.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You're 16,
And I think that
And
is definitely a fair criticism of our
review
opinions for sure.
and opinion,
But
yeah.
but also I do find it interesting that for me it should definitely be the kind of film that should speak to me, but it just doesn't. It doesn't do the same amount of it doesn't feel relatable in the same ways other films have been. And it's because I just don't think that it's been written with the perspective of the actual
Age group.
age group or demographic at all. And I think as a result it comes off as a bit not sketchy, but it almost comes across as a bit inconsistent, I think.
Yeah. A super interesting part here that I want to mention is one of the plots is she obviously wants to go to this school to get better and see if she can make it as a filmmaker. And she has this very half realistic, half animatic style where she kind of draws
Yeah.
over whatever she's filmed, which is pretty cool. She puts
Yeah,
them
I
up
like
on
that.
YouTube and they get lots of views, and almost everybody that she talks to knows about and is at least a little,
Yeah.
if not neutral, positive towards her
Yeah, and
videos.
I think this is, and again, another problem that I have with the film is that it comes across as having their cake and eating it too, where Katie wants to
Yeah,
be a filmmaker, but she's also already famous for her films.
exactly. And it's that sort of, her father is worried about her making a living off this
Yeah.
because he doesn't understand it, which is completely fair,
Yeah,
except
absolutely.
if she was getting the renown and fame that she's supposedly getting in this movie for her videos, she could just live off that YouTube money, you know? Like,
Yeah,
she
well,
wouldn't have to go to school or do whatever, you know?
even at that point, it would her motivation for filmmaking, well, for going to university, would be completely different. In that she would want. I mean, she does still have that presence where she is trying to meet people who are the same as her and think the same way as her, and she's trying to build a network of people who are like-minded. But so much more of her emphasis is so that she can go and study film, which she, if the film is anything to go by, she's already achieved that because she's already well known enough to actually be networking with people beyond a university setting. And it's why it comes across as very inconsistent and dishonest in a sense.
And it's all well and good. Maybe she wants to go and get the more professional education because she feels like it would help her in her talents. Awesome. Great. But she's talking as if she's still a very, very amateur at this and wants to learn and see if she can make it. If that many
Yeah,
people are watching your YouTube videos and liking them and are subscribing to watch your tiny little series about your dog,
yeah,
you don't have to see if you're going to make it. Like, technically, you could make probably not a huge living, but a decent living off
yeah,
your little
absolutely.
online videos.
And I think, like, we'll talk about it more in the in-depth, but I think Katie's intention for going to university or college is completely wrong, in the sense that she's going there to pursue filmmaking, but already has a high enough of a standing where in the real world, if someone who was that well known for making films went to film school, they'd probably be quite heavily disliked
Yes,
because of this sense of pretentiousness where they make their own films, but are already so popular that they don't need to be learning, and they're taking up space and using resources that other people could be using, and they're not going to help other people get further in the industry. They're there to improve themselves. They're there to get further themselves, and
exactly. You'd have two types of people. You'd
yeah,
have people who were sucking up to you to try and get in
yeah,
good so that they could possibly ride off your coattails, and you'd have the people who thought that you were a pretentious asshole for coming to learn when you can already make a living off
yeah.
what you have.
But with all that said, we should talk about the main villain, Pal, which for any of you who don't recognize, that is a reference to Hal, which is as subtle as a brick flying through your window. Sorry, but HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yes, it's the same thing basically, but that's
Can
not
I
the,
admit something real
yeah.
quick?
You didn't did you
I
not know
haven't
that?
seen A Space Odyssey.
That's fine. But ultimately, if you haven't seen it, then it's not going to mean anything to you.
Exactly. And yet
No,
I still managed to figure out exactly what the plot was the
yeah, but
second she came on screen.
it's also, yeah, it's this thing where it's like, if you recognize it, if you recognize that reference, you go, oh, really? Not, oh, cool, it's a reference to Hal. But what do you think about the presentation or the presence of this main villain being an AI that was discarded and is
Look,
now pursuing revenge against its creator?
one of my first notes when we first saw Pal in the movie was Pal deserved better and she's so valid. And then right after that, Elon Musk vibes. So
Yeah, yeah,
I
it
have
really does come
mixed
across as that, doesn't it?
I have mixed feelings where the second that she gets quote unquote thrown away and starts her villain arc, yeah,
Yeah.
babe, 100%. Love that for you. You do you, but also she becomes incredibly annoying the second that we hear her
Yeah.
speak.
I think she has one point of motivation and one tagline of motivation, and then that's it for the rest of the film.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
it's like, why is humanity worth saving? Oh, you're wrong because me. And it's like, oh god, you're really annoying. Which
Yeah,
sucks because she's voiced by Olivia Colman, and Olivia Colman's fucking great.
yeah, she has a really nice voice, but the words could be better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the content that you make, that you build the foundation of the rest of the film on, and it's never the actor's faults. I think one of my biggest takeaways from this was that Danny McBride is actually an incredible actor, just in general, because he can bring this sentimentality to a character just through the voice, and I think that's so important. I think that's why I think it genuinely really helped make this film go from something that would annoy the shit out of me to something that I can tolerate, because his character is genuinely so good. I think that the dad character is the best character in this film without a doubt, and I think because of him and Linda, the mum, I think the film is still watchable.
Yeah, exactly. And I know
Yeah.
we have been ragging on the film a little bit, and we do always like to include a couple positives. So I
Yeah.
do want to say there were a few things that I really loved in this. The sibling relationship in this
Mm.
movie is incredibly realistic,
Yeah.
if a little positive, because it's a movie and they're trying to show,
Heavily
even though
positive,
they're
but still incredibly nice to watch.
realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the more realistic sibling dynamics that I've seen. They don't just, oh,
Yeah.
big sis, little bro, I love you so much. They have in jokes and they kind of confuse their parents because of their in jokes, and they get each other in a way that their parents don't. It's
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
it makes me think of all the times that my mum would come in and we would all be sitting on the couch playing a video game together, and she'd be like, what the hell are you doing,
Mm.
because she didn't understand it as much. Very, very realistic sibling vibes.
Yeah.
And I also really loved, there was a couple specific scenes with the robots that I really loved where their jokes
Yeah.
hit home for me. One being something that I think we'll be talking about in depth, because I know it was your favorite
Mm.
scene
Yeah.
in the whole movie. There's a lot of really good scenes in this movie that, if there wasn't so much filler,
Yeah.
would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. If it wasn't weighed down by the faff, I think this film would still be quite good. And personally, from a cinematic perspective, there are some scenes in this film that are visually really, really stunning, and it's what lends really well to animation, is that you can pretty much make whatever you want in terms of a frame. And some of them in this film are so nice to look at, and there are a scattering of really, really nice positive things that you can say about this film. It's just such a shame that it's just so weighed down by humor that doesn't land, and these other little things that seem to outweigh the good that just keep scattering about, and it's just a bit of a pain. But yeah.
Yeah.
But with that said, we should probably get on to our final thoughts for the review. We can move on to the in-depth and talk about this to our heart's content. But how did you feel about the film on a rating scale, Monique?
Well, out of 10 Furbies, I gave this movie a 5 out of 10. For the best viewing experience, you should focus on the accurate sibling portrayals and the family dynamics as a whole, but really keep it in your mind that Rick, the father, is the true main character of this story, and you'll have a much better time watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very fair.
What about you? What would you rate this lovely animated film?
For me, I am not quite as. I don't feel like I'm quite as kind as you in this regard, but I gave it a 4 out of 10 Furbies. I really like what the film's intention was. The problem is it never fully commits to it. And as a result, it almost feels like a half-assed project, and that makes me sad, honestly.
You know, it's super interesting because when we first started this podcast, I thought that I would be giving higher reviews and you would be giving lower reviews, just as my bias of he critiqued films in school. He's a film major. Like,
Yeah.
he's going to be much harsher than I am. But I think this is one of the only times that you've had a lower rating than me. It doesn't happen very often.
No, and I do always feel bad about giving low ratings, but sometimes it has to be said, and that's just such a shame. Because
And it's entirely subjective as well.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think we always say this. Some movies may be incredibly great to you.
Yeah, this film isn't unwatchable, so
I
ultimately...
think even I Am Mother was one of those ones where when we first watched it, you said you really didn't like it. And I went, oh, that's interesting, because I really liked it. And then I
Yeah.
watched it and I heard your opinions, and my opinion kind of shifted to change because I saw what you were talking about. But I still would watch that movie again, you know?
Yeah, I would still watch it again.
Good. Exactly. It's
Yeah.
still a good movie. It's just not the best.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, I think we'll lead out.
If you would like to follow Will or myself, of course, subscribe to our podcast. You can find myself on Nexitai on Twitter and Instagram, and Will is Grey Mouse Inc. on Twitter and Will_Mortlock on Instagram. He's much more active on Instagram, and I'm much more active on Twitter, where I also do hint refreshes, and we're going to start doing polls as well to see what you guys might want us to watch. So definitely come and follow us if you want some updates.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to hear more from us, we have an in-depth review of The Mitchells vs. the Machines that we will be recording straight after this one. So if you haven't watched the film, definitely go check it out, and then check out that in-depth review where we will be talking more about the stuff that we did like and the stuff that we didn't like. Ultimately, there are still definitely good things to talk about, and we will talk about them in depth alongside the stuff that we didn't like. And this week's Pointless Research, I wanted to look more in depth at something that we both noticed in terms of the humor, and I have archived and checked every single joke and reference in this film. So
as a little bit of a teaser for you, I've also been told I'm not allowed to look at the Pointless Research this week because Will wants to play a game and thoroughly embarrass me. So please do pop over to the in-depth if you would like to see me be very, very horrible at trivia-ish type questions. I think you haven't actually confirmed that's what we're doing.
And if you'd like to participate in it yourself, you almost certainly can. So definitely be sure to check it out. But with that said, that's all from us this week. See you next time.